On the morning of August 13th, 2018, a man stood on his front porch in Frederick, Colorado, and told a news camera that he desperately wanted his family back. He looked directly into the lens. His voice was calm. His eyes were dry. His wife and two daughters had been missing since the night before. What the camera didn't know, what the neighbors didn't know, what even the investigators standing nearby didn't yet know, was that Chris Watts had already killed all three of them and buried them on his employer's property less than 2 miles away. This is the story of one of the most disturbing family annihilation cases in American history, and the psychological unraveling of a man who thought he could lie his way out of it. Chris Watts was 33 years old. He worked for an oil company called Anadarko Petroleum in Colorado. By all appearances, he was an ordinary man living an ordinary life. He had a wife named Shanann, two daughters, Bella, age 4, and Celeste, age 3. Shanann was 15 weeks pregnant with their third child, a boy they had already named Nico. To the outside world, the Watts family looked normal: a house in the suburbs, family photos on social media, a life that seemed unremarkable in every way. But underneath that surface, something had been building for months. Chris Watts had been having an affair with a colleague named Nico, and he had made a decision, a cold, calculated, devastating decision about what he wanted his future to look like. Shanann did not fit into that future. On the night of August 12th, 2018, Shanann returned home from a work trip at approximately 1:48 in the morning. Security footage captured her arriving at the front door. She was never seen alive again. The next morning, Chris Watts drove to the Anadarko worksite. Security footage showed him arriving at 7:13 a.m. He was alone. At 12:10 p.m. that same day, Shanann's friend Nicole Atadero arrived at the house for a scheduled appointment. Shanann wasn't answering her phone. Her car was still in the driveway. Her medication, which she needed daily, was still on the counter. Nicole called the police. When officers arrived, Chris Watts was already back home. He answered the door calmly. He let them inside. He sat down and began describing his wife's disappearance, as if he were reading from a script. He told them they had argued that morning, that Shanann had taken the children and left, that he had no idea where they had gone. What investigators noticed immediately was something that is almost impossible to fake, or in his case, something he failed to fake entirely. Genuine grief looks a specific way. It sounds a specific way. The body moves differently under the weight of real loss. Chris Watts showed almost none of it. Investigators requested that Chris Watts take a polygraph examination. He agreed immediately, a decision that surprised them. Confident liars often agree to polygraphs. They believe they can control their own physiological responses. They believe their acting is good enough to fool the machine. Chris Watts was wrong on both counts. The results of the polygraph were inconclusive, but the behavioral observations during the examination told investigators everything they needed to know. When asked about his daughters, his stress responses spiked dramatically. When asked about Shanann, they were markedly different. The examiner noted something deeply troubling. Chris Watts appeared to show more emotional response when asked about his wife than when asked about his children. That asymmetry haunted the investigators. On August 15th, 2 days after Shanann was reported missing, investigators made a critical decision. They went directly to the Anadarko worksite where Chris Watts was employed. What they found there would end the investigation immediately. Shanann's body had been buried in a shallow grave near one of the oil tanks on the property. Bella and Celeste had been submerged inside the oil storage tanks themselves. The man who had stood on his porch 2 days earlier, asking for his family to come home, had driven past this site every single day since. Confronted with the evidence, Chris Watts initially tried one final lie. He told investigators that he had seen Shanann strangling Celeste that morning during an argument, that he had killed Shanann in a rage to protect his daughter, that he had no explanation for what happened to the girls after that. It was the most desperate kind of lie, the kind built from pieces of truth rearranged into something monstrous. Investigators didn't believe a single word. Forensic evidence told a completely different story. The evidence at the scene, combined with the timeline established by security footage and phone records, made Chris Watts' version of events scientifically impossible. Within hours, he abandoned the lie entirely. Chris Watts confessed to killing his wife and both daughters. He later admitted that he had suffocated Bella and Celeste himself after killing Shanann. He was 33 years old. His daughters were 4 and 3. His unborn son never took a single breath. In November 2018, Chris Watts pleaded guilty to 5 counts of first-degree murder to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. He is currently serving his sentence at Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin, transferred there after receiving threats from other inmates in Colorado. In 2019, he gave a lengthy interview to investigators from prison, a conversation that revealed even more disturbing details about the planning and execution of the murders. What emerged from that interview was a portrait of a man who had compartmentalized his actions so completely that he struggled to access genuine remorse even when speaking about his own children. Forensic psychologists who studied the case described a personality profile characterized by extreme conflict avoidance, emotional suppression, and a deeply distorted relationship with reality. Chris Watts did not kill his family in a moment of rage. He killed them because he had decided they were an obstacle, and he believed, with complete sincerity, that he was smart enough to get away with it. The Watts family case is studied today not just as a true crime story, but as a masterclass in criminal psychology, deceptive behavior under pressure, and the investigative techniques that expose even the most composed liars. Shanann Watts was 34 years old. She had spent years building a life for her family, documenting their moments on social media, fighting through health challenges, loving her daughters fiercely. She deserved better. Bella deserved better. Celeste deserved better. Nico deserved the chance to live. Their story is told here not for entertainment, but so that the patterns that led to their deaths are understood, recognized, and never forgotten. Subscribe to the Case Room. Every case has a story. New files open every week. This content is for educational purposes only.